Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next presentation of the day. I hope that everyone is enjoying this virtual summit. So far, the feedback has been really great, and all of the speakers have been great. The questions that all of you have been asking have been really engaging and very informative. So hopefully you're learning a lot, and really thank you for being a part of this. We appreciate it. I'm really excited about our next speaker. I think I'm excited about every speaker, but I have never met Chad Hanson in person, so I'm happy to finally meet him virtually, at least. But Chad is a member of the faculty in sociology and religion at Casper College. He is also the co-founder and the director of the Wyoming Mustang Institute. In addition, he's the author of several books, including In a Land of Awe and a forthcoming title, The Wild Horse Effect, Awe, Well-Being, and the Transformative Power of Nature. So I'm very excited to hear this presentation. I'm going to turn it over to you, Chad. And if anyone has questions, everyone is muted. So just please put your questions in the chat. And after Chad's presentation, we'll be happy to ask those questions to him. So thank you again.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks to you and Heather and Jen. I'm really glad to be a part of the week and the weekend. What a great thing to bring everybody together for the sake of talking about wild Mustangs. I sent a request to share my screen. I just want to make sure that goes through.
I did approve that, Chad, so you should be all good.
Okay. My computer is just loading the slideshow. I prepared a set of slides that I'll walk you through. Let's see. Getting close. For some reason. What are you able to see? Can I ask Heather or Chris? Can you see my screen?
We can just see you.
Because let's try this. How's that?
There, now yep, there you go. Perfect.
Okay. We go back. For some reason, I was in the middle of the show. All right, here we are. This set of slides and the talk I want to give today represents some of the things I've been thinking and writing about for the last, really culmination of the last few years. I want to draw your attention to this image first. I first became aware of this picture in the work of Wendy Williams. She makes reference to this image in her great book called The Horse, A History of Our Noble Companion. This image was first used in the American Museum of Natural History. And the first time I saw it, I couldn't help but feel struck by the symmetry. And you think about the horse and the man, the joints, the vertebrae, the rib cages, the shoulder blades. It's almost uncanny to see a horse and a human side by side this way. And then it turns out that from a genetic standpoint, it takes 32 paired chromosomes to make a modern horse. And of those 32, 17 of them are identical to what you find in a human being. So from just a hard-nosed genetic and scientific standpoint, we share more with horses than we have in the way of differences. That's from a genetic standpoint. From a literary standpoint, same thing. I don't know how many of you would have had the same experience, but I was tasked with reading J.D. Salinger's book, The Catcher in the Rye, when I was a sophomore in high school, and I never quite got over it. Probably for a couple of reasons. One of my favorites is that the main character, Holden Caulfield, he was a kid in the story, but somehow he had figured out at a young age that most of the things we say and do and take for granted, or at least a good share of them, are wrong, wrong-headed. And isn't that about right? But secondarily, one of the things I liked about that book, and in particular, one of the things I liked about this quote, is that Salinger is pointing to the idea that horses and humans do have a lot in common. In fact, they have a lot of the traits that we admire most in each other. Things like trust and loyalty and affection, except that in horses, those traits and characteristics are even turned up a few notches. There's a lot to like. For most of our history in the sciences, there's been a real reluctance to make comparisons between people and animals. In fact, if a scientist was charged with anthropomorphism in the past, it was almost like a kiss of death. They had a hard time getting published or being taken seriously. All of that has started to change recently. And in 2020, for example, a top biologist named Carl Safina published this book, Becoming Wild, and you can see the subtitle for yourself. He uses terms that people just weren't comfortable using in the past, things like culture and family. For the first time, someone with high stature in the scientific community, Safina, was starting to use words to suggest that the daily lives of animals are probably not altogether different from our own daily lives. Specifically with respect to wild horses, I've been looking back through some of the peer-reviewed journals where biologists, ecologists, and zoologists have been studying horses in the wild. And one of my favorite examples comes from the 1980s. Many of you might recognize the first author here, J. Kirkpatrick. He's probably most well known for almost single-handedly creating PZP, the anti-fertility serum that we use with wild mares today. In '86, Kirkpatrick conducted a meta-analysis, or a study of studies. He took a look at all the reproductive behavior in wild horses across the West, and including states on the East Coast, like in Maryland and the Carolinas. And Kirkpatrick was a scientist of the old school and biology. This was true in my field, sociology, for a long time as well. It's almost like we have hard science envy. It's almost like we pattern our own fields after disciplines like physics and chemistry. There's a tendency to want to look for the forces of nature driving all of the behavior or everything we see in the field and in the laboratory. Kirkpatrick was looking for law-like patterns or the forces of nature at work shaping reproductive behavior in horses, and there's some evidence for that, and he found it. Typically, when a mare is about to give birth, as you can see from the quote, most often they'll hide away into a place on their own. But in this case, this photo was made in June of last year, and the horse in the center, the mare here that's surrounded by her band, this horse is about to give birth, and she was clearly not in a sheltered spot, not any distance from her band. In fact, her band was, they wouldn't seem to leave her alone. Kirkpatrick actually found, and he was a lover of horses and an honest enough scientist, that he was able to bring together and share that there are the patterns when it comes to birth rites and rituals in the wild horse world, they're not universal. And in fact, in the Red Desert, Kirkpatrick and others found that mares actually stay right with their band when they give birth. These images, the last one and the one you see here, were both taken in what is officially called the Red Desert, although it's the Green Mountain Herd area. So it's not red or a desert, but officially it's part of the Red Desert Complex. And last summer, I was able to watch this birth, and you can see for yourself, there was a formal rite or ritual that took place after the birth of this foal. The mother's still in the picture. You can actually see the blood on her legs after the birth, after the immediate birth of the foal. One by one, the other members of the band came and squinted into the eyes of this newly born foal, and then they all moved into position and formed a canopy over this newborn. I'm a still photographer. This was one of those times where I wish I had the foresight to have recorded the whole thing in video. I have stills about every 5 seconds for a period of 20 minutes. And this is one of my favorites. So Safina and Kirkpatrick both write to suggest that horse behavior is not necessarily universally driven by the forces of nature. In fact, horses have a lot of free will, and they make decisions based on the norms, values that they establish in their bands, in their wider clans. Here's the commercial portion of today's program. I do have a new book coming out. It doesn't ship until March. I'm really excited about it. I'm a sociologist, and a good share of the book has to do with the impact of horse watching on human psychology. But I have a chapter in the book that's really devoted to horse behavior. It's chapter 3, and in this chapter, I do as well as I can to share about everything I've learned when it comes to wild horse behavior in the last several years. I wish I could say that sociologists were the first to use this phrase, but it was actually teams of biologists that first began to describe wild horses as living in societies. In 2021 and 2023, Hungarian team and a Japanese team used drones to study the wild horses in the national parks of Mongolia. And they used a platform and a piece of software that social scientists use to study social networks among people. And their data is exactly what you find in social science journals. This is a lot to look at, I understand. But let me say a few words about what you're seeing here. Each circle is a band of horses. They're color-coded to show that the band is led by a single stallion or a pair of stallions. And then there are 2 bachelor bands in this herd. They're called all-male units. They're here in green. So through the use of drones, they were able to show that these bands have, in some cases, weak or in some cases strong ties to one another. And you can see by the thickness of the line that the bands are either strongly bonded or weakly associated with one another. The researchers in this case use a convention that we often use in human life. They assumed that the stallion was the leader of each band. Think of how we do this in our own culture. We consider men, or at least we have for a long time, we've considered men the head of the household when there's a male and a female under the same roof. Well, think about the American households you know. I'm thinking about my own. Hey, I think on a good day, I'm maybe like the co-director where my house is concerned. There's actually a lot of variety and a lot of things negotiated within these families or bands. But the great thing about this research is that it begins to show all of the networks and connections that go into the making of a herd, including families. We're just starting to use terms that you find in other forms or in other avenues of wildlife conservation, like bonded groups or even wider clans that exist within a herd. Through the use of drones, we're starting to paint a really good picture of how social networks form within groups of wild horses. It's exciting. In 23, the Hungarian team actually used the same research techniques to show that the movements of wild horses are related to not just their relationships, but prior experiences. So they were able to show that horses give thought to who they know and where they've been, and they use those thoughts to make decisions about where to move in the future. So this team could actually predict the movements of wild bands based on interactions in their recent past. I'm a little guilty myself of thinking that horses are, in a lot of ways, quite a bit different from people. For a long time, I assumed that horses were almost Zen-like in their commitment to this moment. I imagine them kind of blissfully locked in the moment, like someone in meditation, Buddhist or otherwise. But it turns out they're actually quite a bit like us. They think about their past and they use what's happened to them recently to chart their course in the future. Turns out their lines of thought are remarkably similar to our own. And so I think this has created an incredible opportunity for us. I saw this picture of Jane Goodall and one of her associates watching chimpanzees, and I thought, well, isn't that a lot like me and most of us on this call today? We're out there, if not every day, then weekly or monthly, making observations of horses. Jane Goodall's work was paradigm changing. It was groundbreaking work on the social organization in chimpanzees, and one of the reasons her work made such a big splash is because Goodall didn't have any training in biology. She was hired by an anthropologist, which probably makes good sense, but she came into the field just making honest observations, empirical observations about the things that were happening in front of her. Biologists have opened the door. They've conceded that wild horses live in societies. We're the people in the field out there every day. I think we're in a position to make a great contribution at this point in history. Social scientists have been a little behind the ball, I have to admit. That we're pretty committed to researching humanity. Animals haven't always been on the radar. There are some important exceptions. I can't recommend this book enough. There's an anthropologist at the University of Texas in Austin named John Hartigan, who wrote a book about a ritual that takes place in Spain every year. In the past, they used to gather wild horses for the sake of shaving their manes. There was a commercial market for horsehair. They still conduct the ritual today. It's a kind of a tourist spectacle. People come to watch. And for the first time, a social scientist attended a human ritual that involved animals, and he actually paid attention to the animals. Social scientists have been going to dog shows, barnyards, and bullfights for generations, and we never had much to say about the animals. We paid a lot of attention to the people. Hartigan turned the tables, and he used the tools of ethnography and sociology to understand how horses manage in what can be tense and anxiety-causing ritual. Hartigan loves horses, and they're the stars of this book, and maybe more so than anybody at this moment, he's putting social science techniques to good use in the study of animals. Animals are different. Watching animals is different than watching people, but it's not altogether different. When wild horses gesture to one another, it's not always obvious what the meaning or the intent should or ought to be, but don't we kind of face the same things ourselves? Famously, an anthropologist named Clifford Geertz wrote an entire chapter of a book on the human wink. What did I do there? Am I flirting? Am I pulling your leg? Aren't you left to wonder? Animals and people aren't that different. When we gesture to one another, there's often ambiguity. It's hard to make interpretations, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. Actually, we should try harder and more often and more systematically. I guess that's what I would argue. We already know an awful lot about wild horse behavior. We've talked already about some of their rituals. They observe roles within their family. They establish norms. And even more so than us, their senses like sight, sound, and smell surpass ours. And I want to talk about how they use their senses to navigate their social worlds. Physical touch is something that's understudied. If you've spent time in the field, as I know nearly all of you have, it's hard to ignore. Wild horses have hundreds of thousands of acres they can wander, and they stick to each other. They're almost never out of touch. But in laboratory-like settings and even in field-based research, that's one area where we could probably use new lines of research. Smell, on the other hand, has been studied a lot. We know a lot about horses' olfactory abilities. We know more about dogs. If you're a dog owner and a reader, I bet you've probably run across the work of Alexandra Horowitz. I love the picture on the cover of her book because it's the dog's nose that's front and center. Dogs live in a world of smell. Humans have about 5 to 6 million olfactory receptors in our nose or in our sinuses. Dogs and horses alike have about 300 million. And the differences when it comes to what they can perceive with their nose are uncanny. You're probably familiar with some of the studies around the dog's sense of smell. They can smell cancer cells in the human body. They can smell diabetes. They can smell if you're happy or if you're anxious. Their abilities are uncanny, and horses are no different. Their biology matches that of dogs. There is good research on the olfactory ability of horses, and I'm glad to say that some of the research has been able to document that horses navigate a good part of their social world through the use of smell. Each horse has what we call a scent signature. And when you see horses breathing into one another's nostrils, this practice is establishing identity. They're telling each other who's who when they breathe back and forth. The air that leaves a horse's nostrils contains a chemical signature. It's meaningful. We've probably all seen some of the dust-ups that take place around fecal pile displays. In barnyard terms, we call them stud piles. At the Wyoming Mustang Institute, we call them metapiles because horses approach these piles and they scan what's there. They can tell who was there and when. They can probably tell a lot more than that. They can probably tell the emotional state of the horse that left the droppings. They can probably sense things like cortisol and testosterone levels. And when stallions approach a pile at the same time, it often becomes competitive. So not uncommon to see fights in the area of a fecal pile. More so than just for the sake of leaving your calling card, we've been able to document in Wyoming how horses leave these piles at extremely strategic places, including the intersections of crossroads on the range, In an area where horses are able to pass through an open gate, horses will often leave piles almost like breadcrumbs. And researchers have been able to study horse feces and learn about the levels of the stress hormone cortisol that's contained there. So in the laboratory, we're able to tell whether a horse is anxious or calm just by examining their droppings. And there's no reason to think that horses wouldn't be able to do the same thing when they examine piles like this in the field. They can tell who is here and when, whether they ran through, whether they were anxious at the time they left this dropping, or whether they were comfortable, whether this place is safe. So in effect, horses are mapping their geography with these piles. And hard to think that horse poop is at the heart of what happens in the prairie, but in truth, if you spent time out there, it's a big part of the geography, and it's central to horse behavior and decision making. Horses whinnying are one of the greatest sounds that you can hear. And I'm glad to say that biologists have studied the vocalizations that horses make. And I won't read the quote on the bottom for you, but all of our best evidence suggests that horses modulate their voices in about exactly the same way we would. When they're upset, or when they're afraid or angry, or happily greeting another horse. The tone and the volume matches exactly the same kind of vocalizations that we make in conversation. One of my favorite studies of the last few years actually concerns horse vocalizations, but it goes one step further. There was an ingenious study developed by Leanne Proops and a team at Princeton. They published this in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And you're not imagining things. The acronym is just like it looks, PENUS. Scientists, words and their meanings, not their strong suit. I'd have probably gone with a different abbreviation. In any case, it's the most prestigious place that a biological scientist can publish. And this research was a little bit uncanny. I'll talk for a second about how it worked. All the subjects in the study were horses that knew each other. They had spent time and were familiar with one another over a period of years, so they're completely familiar. And then in the course of the research, what they did was they took a single horse as a subject, and then they had a curtain behind which was another horse, one of their friends or barnmates. So from behind the curtain, they played through audio recording, they played the sound of the subject's bandmate, or barnmate, I should say. And then they had the horse's friend walk out from behind the curtain. And when the subject horse heard this horse's voice and then saw this horse walk out from behind the curtain, it's a quick look. That's Jerry. Nothing out of the ordinary. But here's where the research takes a turn. Same subject, they played a different horse's voice from behind the curtain. Let's say Carl. They played Carl's voice behind the curtain, and then Jerry walks out. So the voice and the sight were incongruent. That elicited an incredible response from the subject horse. They'd walk over, they'd look, they'd investigate. What? That's not Carl. What? And so what the researchers concluded is that horses use both visual cues and sound to know one another. And that's a pretty astounding finding. But let's think about this one step further. What this suggests is that horses walk around with the image and voices of the horses that they know in their minds. Isn't that about like you and me? Walking around thinking about the people we know and what they said to us the last time we were together. It turns out that their cognitive processes are remarkably like our own. From a sociological standpoint, for me, the biggest breakthrough in equine research of the last several years came in 2021. A team of Italian researchers worked with a group of equine subjects, and they put them through a battery of tests, and the horses in the study passed what's called the mirror self-recognition test. So the way it works is they placed, in the opening rounds of the study, they placed clear marks. They used a Vaseline-like substance. It was easily spread on the horse's face, but it didn't have a color. It didn't look obvious. It just created a shiny X on their faces. And then they let the horses look in the mirror, and the horses didn't pay any attention. Just having something on their face like that, relatively invisible, didn't catch their attention or elicit a response. In later rounds of the subject, they changed the mark on the cheek to a white one. They used a white kind of a paste that left a clear mark on the horse's face. And then they let the horse into a corral where they were able to see themselves in a full-length mirror. Most of the horses in the study walked up to the mirror, checked behind it to make sure that there wasn't somebody else back there, and then returned to the front of the mirror, realized it was them, noticed that they had an X on their face, and then took that over to the pole that they had centered in the corral and rubbed it until it was gone, reestablishing their appearance. Well, let's think about this. Every bathroom in America has a mirror over the sink. It's standard. And the simple reason for it is that human beings are social. When I go camping by myself on a solo backpack trip, I don't take a mirror because I'm alone and I don't need one. But if I'm going anywhere, work, school, the store, anywhere else, I always look in the mirror at least once in the morning before I leave the house because I want to know. We have mirrors because we want to know what other people see when they look at us. That's what mirrors are for. And it's because we have this ability, sociologists call it role taking. We have the ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And we can even look out at the world through other people's eyes. And not only that, but we can take other people's eyes and we can turn them back at ourselves. We can imagine, and frankly, we want to know what other people are seeing when they look at us. But that's because we have a social self. We have a social identity. And we have to walk that thing out into the world each day and manage it. I have to go be Chad. I'm being Chad right now. I have to go be me for the rest of the afternoon. I've got classes to teach. I got to go be me in front of entire rooms full of people. I've got this social self I have to manage. Horses do too. When given the chance, they'll make use of a mirror because they've got to go be with other horses and they need to manage that persona in front of the other horses that they know. I can't think of anything more human than that. So in a nutshell, I keep referencing books. I'm not trying to give you all a reading list, but there's just so much good research and writing on this topic lately. 22 book called The Creative Lives of Animals. Carol Gigliotti says, animals think about the past. They think about the future. They imagine the thoughts and feelings of others. They're more human than we've ever given them credit for. And for me, that's important because we afford other human beings a certain level of dignity. And I think where wild horse management is concerned, I think probably most of us on this call would be much more comfortable if we afforded horses the kind of dignity that I think they deserve. You don't have to watch too much news about wild horses before you hear about helicopter roundups and long-term holding. And we know that there are more humane, efficient, cost-effective, and frankly, more dignified ways to manage populations of wild horses. And for me, getting the rest of the world to see these animals as having dignity, I think it should be one of our biggest goals. It's one of my biggest goals. That's how I've been approaching this subject, especially in the last few years. I am proud to say that I am a plaintiff in the suit that was brought by American Wild Horse Conservation, Western Watersheds, Animal Welfare Institute, Kimberly Curl, Carol Walker, and myself. That suit's going to the 10th, the suit to try to save the Salt Wells Creek and Divide Basin horses goes to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in March. And I'm not kidding when I say I'm proud to be part of that, and I'm thankful for the people who made it happen. But in my mind, lawsuits are kind of always the last resort. I think the real long-term way to change, we think, talk about wild horses, and the real way to change the way that they're managed is to change our culture. I think it's, in the long run, it's social movements that make a difference. And here we are, how many of us on this call? I'm glad to know that there are good people working to do nothing but grow and expand this movement. Sandra Day O'Connor, and she would know, she served on the Supreme Court. When she made legal decisions, they were really social, cultural, political, and economic decisions. I realize that advocacy work is hard and people burn out, but I like this piece of advice from the physicist Max Planck. A lot of times we don't even know what kind of a difference we're making in our lifetime. He suggests that nothing changes until people die. I'm not wishing death on anybody here. I'm just suggesting that sometimes social change happens over the course of generations. I'm lucky I spend good parts of my day in rooms full of 18 to 24-year-olds. And I am convinced that things are going to be different, if not in the short term, then in the long term. So have heart, stay with it, and don't forget to have fun. I was given instructions not to use this photograph, and I could not help myself. I did it anyway. That's my wife standing in the Stewart Creek area. I think it's probably safe to say, hey, we were talking about head of household earlier. I think I'm probably officially in the doghouse now. But it's Friday. Who knows? Maybe a dinner and a night out. Cross your fingers. See how long I have to stay in the doghouse. This picture is worth it, though. I hope you agree. Hey, I'm going to switch back. I'm going to stop sharing. And I know the format includes a Q&A, so I'm happy to take any questions or happy to have a part in any discussion that people would like to have at this stage. Chris, can I turn it over to you, or Heather?
Yes, thank you so much, Chad. That was all very, very fascinating. I have a question for you. It was interesting for me to see, the X on the horse's cheek and that they had noticed that. I'm wondering what your opinion would be then of the 15 mares in Theodore Roosevelt National Park that they put these lovely collars on. How do you think that is impacting the horses?
Well, now that is an interesting fashion accessory. Yes. I don't know. I don't know what horses make of that, honestly. When I was talking before about people having difficulty interpreting one another's gestures, like a wink, for example, that is tricky. But we have the advantage, as social scientists, we have the advantages of being able to walk up to people and ask them, what did you mean by that? With animals, it's tougher. I don't know. Is it a stigma? You know, people jokingly talk about animals, dogs and cats who have to wear that cone. You know, they call it the cone of shame. Does this put them, you know, does it compromise their position with their peers? Maybe. It wouldn't surprise me, to tell you the truth. They are
I've
so
seen
social. Yeah.
I've seen one mare in particular who has a 3-year-old son in the band that she's in. And it seems like since the collar is put on, the two of them who have been joined at the hip for 3 years, suddenly it seems like the mother is more keeping her distance from them, from him. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like she
Yeah.
doesn't know what it is, you know, maybe is more of a protective thing. I'm not sure. So
Could be. Yeah. She doesn't know what it is. She and the other horses, they don't know what it means.
right,
You know, you can imagine some of the confusion that might surround a change like that.
right. Krista wants to know when your new book comes out, how will we be able to order it? Do you know that yet?
Oh yeah, I mean it's anywhere and anyhow. It's on all the online retailers. It's available for pre-order. It won't ship until March, but all the big I like bookshop.org, but any online retailer of your choice, or you can just have your local bookstore order it.
Okay, thank you. Mary wants to know, how did your knowledge help you contribute to litigation strategy?
Well, our lawyers are outstanding, and they didn't need my help much. But yeah, you know, we were able to look over briefs and things like that, and I think for some of us who've spent time in those areas, uh, I think the legal team appreciated having some of that local knowledge available when they created some of their briefs. But yeah, let me be clear, they didn't need my help. The team really knows what they're doing.
Mary also wants to know, do you have any advice to advocates, citizens to demand change to recognize the dignity of wild horses?
Yeah, I think the best strategy we can use is to take our photographs and our footage and use them as evidence, and to take the best of our current research and to show people that real horses in real places are exhibiting these incredible traits and characteristics. I think that's going to help to turn the tide a little bit. People already love horses, but I think that there's still an extra level. I think we can turn this up a notch. I think we can tell the world just a little bit more just about how miraculous these animals are. So I think it's doing the things we already do. I think most of us who spend time in the field, you know, we all go with cameras, and we're already good at this. I just think we can do more of it.
Heather wants to know if you're currently teaching any classes on wild horses or wild horse issues.
Yeah, my next course isn't until June. The course I teach at Casper College is called the Wild Horse Experience, and it's 3 days. We have 2 afternoons on campus and then a day in the field. In Wyoming, this time of year, the weather makes it tricky to look for horses. The roads are often snowed in, and then we get a long mud season in the spring, so we really have to wait until about June till the snow melts and the roads dry up, and then we can get back out there and reliably get groups into the field. So yeah, it's on the books. There'll be announcements probably on our website in about early May, and if people are interested, yeah, there'll be ways to sign up.
And do people have to be a student of Casper College, or can anyone in the public join?
Yeah, anyone can. Casper College, you know, graciously supports the whole thing. We use their vehicles and the classrooms and such, but these are non-credit bearing courses, so it's just a 3-day affair. you don't earn college credits per se, and the tuition is pretty minimal. I forget exactly the cost, but it's I want to say in the neighborhood of $60. Not
All
bad
right.
for 3 days. Yeah.
Mary wants to know, how do you think that we can accelerate emerging social conscious that wild horses are inherently valuable, deserve protection, etc.?
Um, I think we work together, and when it comes to getting people to see that wild horses are intelligent, they have free will, and they're making decisions together, that they create cultures. I I think we could probably be more systematic, and I think we probably could work together more effectively, sharing stories and building a narrative, just like in that instance where I showed how after the birth of a foal, a band came together in a ritual to create a canopy over the newborn. I'd never seen that before. I'd be interested if somebody else has seen that. I would love to know if bands in other areas are doing the same thing or something different. And I
I've
think, yeah,
I've seen
sorry.
similar things in Theodore Roosevelt National Park, more in the cold, where they'll take the young foals and put them in the center, and then the band will form around them like that, like to block the wind, block the cold as much as they can.
Right. Yeah, I've seen the same thing. So, yeah, bit by bit, building blocks, I think we can start to build a better picture of horse behavior. The tendency, especially historically, the tendency was to think that animal behavior was ruled by the forces of nature. So if you've seen one wild horse, you've seen them all. They all do the same thing. Well, we know that isn't true. And ironically, in the domestic horse world, anybody who lives with horses know that they all have different personalities, and that they're individuals, and they make choices, and groups form preferences and hierarchies and things like that. It's for some reason we've had an easier time accepting that in domestic horses, but it's true for wild horses as well. Somehow when we shift into wildlife mode, we want to think that you've seen one, you've seen them all. Their behavior is consistent and instinctive or something like that. But no, in fact, there's more to know and more to think about. And I'd love to see bigger groups of us working together to document this kind of thing. Jane Goodall blew the lid off of what we know about chimpanzees, just because she didn't come in with those preconceived ideas. She talked different. She accepted that each animal was an individual and they had relationships, and she really changed the way we think and talk about primates. And it feels like we're on the verge of something similar where horses are concerned. I hope it's true.
Right. Has anyone ever done a study on the horses' behavior changes once they're separated in the pens? Like any health declines, like when they're put into the BLM holding pens?
Yeah, interesting. No, not to my knowledge. And it would be really, really, really easy to do. Like, for example, uh, you can test for stress hormones like cortisol. The research I showed, they use fecal samples, but you can use a hair sample too. And actually, the study I cited earlier was conducted around a situation where mares were switching bands at a high rate. And even just changing from one band to another causes a spike in stress hormones or cortisol among wild mares. So you can only just imagine what happens when a helicopter bears down on a group of
Right.
horses and they're separated from their families and then kept in long-term holding. I didn't point this out, but I think with one possible exception, the research that was done at Princeton, all of the other studies I cited today were international. They were conducted by teams in Switzerland, Hungary, Japan, and Hungary. Most of the research about horse intelligence, their social lives, emotional capacities, is done in other countries. And part of the reason for that is that it has to do with the way research is funded. In the United States, if you want to do a study on wild horses, you typically have to get funding from an agency like the BLM. And the BLM doesn't really fund studies on horse intelligence. They do fund studies on fertility control. But, you know, in fairness to the BLM, that's their highest priority. But there's just not a lot of funding for research on horse intelligence. So when I became curious about this issue, I noticed that I had to rely almost exclusively on international studies. That's not to say that we shouldn't be studying the welfare of these animals when they're brought in off of the range. That question seems obvious to me. How are they doing?
Right.
But to my knowledge, we haven't taken the time to ask.
Diane wants to know, do you present this information, your knowledge, to the people in the Wyoming legislature?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I've actually had, I know some state legislators, yeah, and we've talked. I've had city council people take my class. So, yeah, at some level, I do communicate. Horses are managed at the federal level. So, you know, we really only have 3 federal representatives in Wyoming. We only have 1 House member and 2 senators. So I have been in contact with them. They tend to be unsympathetic, but it's Wyoming, and we're the cowboy state. And I think it's a culture of agribusiness that kind of predominates here. I think from a legislative standpoint, there are probably other states in the union where we could turn to look for people to push new federal legislation. The Wyoming contingent, I'm less hopeful about. But it's not that wild horses don't have friends in DC. They do. But I wouldn't count the Wyoming senators or representative among them, typically.
So Vi wants to know, how do we reach nationally and with what's happening?
How do we reach nationally? I think there are so many groups that do such a good job at this. We're kind of doing it now, and I'm so proud to be a part of a meeting like this. I think this kind of thing makes a big difference. You know, I used to be a big fan of what they call the legacy media now. You know, I used to publish in university-based journals and print magazines and things like that. I think in this day and age, people are getting their information from good data to show that people get their news from social media. So I think everything we're doing in that direction makes sense. Facebook and Instagram, podcasts, increasingly, venues and forums like this. Hey, 10 years ago, we couldn't do this. And look at us now. I think we're moving in the right direction.
Do any of your students become advocates that you know of?
Yeah, sometimes they do. In fact, we have kind of a neat class after class after class. Some people, they take the class and see wild horses with the group, and that's that. They may not go back out for a while, but some students take the class and get the bug, and they go back out, and we see them out there on the range, or we get emails from them telling us about a recent sighting on the range, or wanting to know where Lynn and I saw horses last. gets to be kind of like a fishing report, where are they biting this week? Where can you go?
Right.
That kind of thing. It's been rewarding. It's been fun. I think
To me,
education is key. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's a good question, and I think it's one of the most important things I do. I think there's a real hunger for knowledge about wild horses. When I open up, I've never had my class not fill up and then have a waiting list on top of that. There's just a real strong interest in this topic, and people know that somehow or for some reason, wild horses aren't getting their due. In Wyoming, we don't even have, in most herd areas, we don't even have signs to indicate that you're in a wild horse herd area. So I think people are getting a sense that we have this amazing thing in states like Wyoming, and somehow they've been kept a secret. And I think the lid is finally coming off of that secret, and I think it's great.
I agree. Education is a key, and that's why we did the summit. And you're our seventh speaker so far, and everyone's been very engaging. And even all the Q&As, you can see that hunger for knowledge. And how do I say the right thing? How do I do the right thing? What can we do different? Seem to be reoccurring questions people are asking. What would you recommend as an alternative to collars to track and study horses? You mentioned the study with drones. Could that technology be used in Theodore Roosevelt National Park?
Yeah, I don't know why not. It has, to my knowledge, that technology hasn't been used in the US. It's only been used in Mongolia, and it's been used by, I think I mentioned a team in Hungary, and there was a team led by a Japanese researcher at the University of Kyoto. But they were not bashful about their technique, and everything they did is all really perfectly well spelled out. So if a team in the US wanted to use the same technology, the roadmap is there. Everything that field biologists would want to know about how to use drones has been fully documented. So yeah, no reason we couldn't use that kind of a technique. Sometimes it just boils down to the kind of funding that researchers can pull together for a project, and maybe their own expertise and familiarity with different research strategies. This is a new technique. The publications, the earliest one was 2021, and then the most recent one was 23. So we're only talking about a couple of years ago that people really put these drones to good use. I hope we can move in that direction. There's a lot we can learn about the social world that horses live in. There's a lot we can learn about that from drones, and it's unobtrusive. The good ones today are quiet. They just quietly loom above a horse herd collecting data.
Christian wants to know, he wonders if a co-authored paper by some of us putting our observations together would be worthwhile.
I think it's a great idea. I don't know why we don't do more of that. I mean, what a reason for, I mean, hey, horses aren't the only creatures that are social. We've got so many great people that I consider part of this movement. And we almost never co-author papers. So yeah, I think that would be a great move. That paper I cited that was written by J. Kirkpatrick, he was a co-author on that. And the thing I like best about that paper is that he really made use of a lot of the things that people have been measuring across the West and even on the East Coast. It was a real comparative approach. And that's what allowed Kirkpatrick to kind of break through and say, wow, yeah, this behavior is not instinctual. It's cultural, and it varies by region, just like you'd expect regional differences in a human society. So yeah, I think collaboration, especially even across boundaries or regions, I think it makes all the sense in the world.
Collaboration is a very big word that I've heard, I think, in probably 7 different presentations now. Collaboration and working together, it's absolutely something we need more of in wild horse advocacy.
Well,
Any,
I have to
go
say
ahead.
that because I'm a sociologist, so I have to say this, um, but it does big changes take social movements, and working together is just absolutely key to that.
Mary wants to know if you have any advice on how to recalibrate the BLM DOI.
The DOI, you'll have to, I guess I'm not familiar.
Department of Interior.
Oh, recalibrate the Department of the Interior? Well, I'm afraid that's about to be recalibrated. Um, I don't know if Doug Burgum was officially installed yet
Yep,
as,
yesterday.
oh, was it yesterday?
Yep.
I think they have an acting BLM director, but my hunch is that Burgum will select one or appoint one in the weeks ahead. And Chris, you probably know more about this than I do. My sense is that Burgum's priority is in energy development, and that'll mark a departure for the Department of the Interior. Historically, through both Democratic and Republican administrations, it's been agribusiness people or people with strong ties to agribusiness that have led the Department of the Interior. So I'm actually hopeful about this change. Of course, the BLM director, when that final appointment is made, that's going to be consequential. But I think at this point, we're kind of in a wait and see game. I will say this, especially in the last year and a half or so, in part through collaboration with American Wild Horse Conservation, and Carol Walker and some other really outstanding, Kimberly Curl, some really great horse advocates, Eric Malvar. We've been having some good conversations with the Wyoming BLM. So I'm talking about at the state level. And we don't obviously agree with them on everything. We're going to court in March over a disagreement. But outside of the courtroom, we've been having some good conversations about humane and effective fertility control. And we've been pushing the ball forward. So regardless of how things change in DC or in Colorado or whatever combination of federal offices they have today, I think at the state level, whatever state you happen to live in, I think there's good opportunities. I think if you find the people in the BLM who like horses and want to do the right thing, and the BLM has staff who like wild horses and want to do the right thing. I think our job is to find those people and work with them. To me, that's always seemed like our best bet. And in Wyoming, we're in the early stages here, but I'm hopeful. I think we can. I think we can change the way horses are managed, especially in a few key areas. I think we can change it for the better.
Well, I know Senator Hoeven specifically asked Governor Burgum at his confirmation hearing. He said, we've been working to keep the horses in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And he said to him, I'm a horse person. I know that you and your wife love horses too. Do I have a commitment from you to continue to work with us on this? So I hope you're right. I hope that I think that no matter what is happening, though, the other thing is we have to keep raising our voices. We can't just, the time for waiting for somebody else to take care of the issue is over. I think we need to all be raising our voices and elevate that in one way. So
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Cautiously optimistic, but I'm with you. The time is right. I'm a teacher and I've got this class and I do what it takes to prepare. And so I'm pretty immersed in the research on horse behavior. And it seems like, and it's not just horses, there's kind of a turn happening with respect to how we think and talk about animals and how we study them, I think the moment is right.
I agree. Diana said, it seems that wild horse advocates still need to find a way to become more powerful in presenting this information. I'm a commenter on our US social schedule, but I'm full on fire about the treatment of wild horses and wild animals in general. I don't mind being a disturber either, so what can I do? I speak up on YouTube, even now when speaking about the horses, when others bring up a subject that allows me to mention the brutality to these horses. And again, all animals. I donate when I can do rescues, etc. Our culture is the problem. So yeah, I think we agree.
Yeah, I think that's right. In Wyoming, yeah, I think this might be true in other states. That wild horses, they're kind of on the margins where media coverage is concerned. We get a little attention around a roundup. I think we could do a better job drawing attention to wild horses for other reasons. It seems like here, anytime wild horses are in the news, it's because they're being gathered, and it's heartbreaking. But, think of all the different ways that we could celebrate this gift that we have, wild horse herds among us. I'd like to see more coverage of this issue kind of in between roundups.
Right.
And yeah,
I know I noticed that too, even with our nonprofit, when the roundup that was happening in October, I've got everyone's attention, but we still need attention in these moments in between. So
right.
um Jeanette wants to know from me, is there any headway on a national organization for the wild horses? I think that I don't know that we could ever get to one organization. It would require so much ego to be put aside to create one entity that would speak together. But I do think that, and I know this is something that Heather and I have talked a lot about, and it's part of what we're hoping happens here, that maybe we can't have one national organization, but why can't your organization help my organization? And when your organization needs help, why can't I help them too? And have our followers do that. And we've done that a lot on our page. I've said a lot to our followers, hey, this is Heather, and she has stepped up when we needed her for our horses, and now she needs us to speak up for Salt Walls Creek, right? So we need to do that, or McCullough Peaks, or whatever the case may be. I do think that, like I said, I think in almost every presentation we've had, collaboration is a key. We have to find a way to say, I may not agree with everything that you believe, Chad, but I think that you're a pretty good guy, and I think that we could work together, right? Or hey, maybe I don't know as much about birth control, but hopefully everybody tunes into Ginger's presentation and learns something, and can at least respect that opinion, and not be like, absolutely not, I can't be friends with you because you think that PZP is good. Those are our problems that we need to work out.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I think there are actually advantages to having groups that are aimed at national issues, local groups that are based around the protection of a particular herd, statewide groups that are concerned with all of the horses in a given state. I don't think there's anything bad about actually, I think there's a certain amount of strength in having different groups aimed at different audiences and concerned with small groups of horses or the nation writ large. And there's good models for collaboration. The one I always cite, I didn't think to put it in this slideshow, but there was a really incredible coalition that came together around wilderness protection in Utah. We saw it in particular around the Bears Ears region and the effort to make that a national monument. But there was even a longer running and wider movement to have certain public lands in Utah designated as wilderness. And if anybody's interested, it's easy to Google around on this. And groups like the Sierra Club and Defenders of Wildlife and state and local groups came together, and clothing manufacturers like Patagonia and the North Face Just a really wide range of national, international, and local groups came together around that common cause. And that can become a force. And I'm with you. I think there is the potential for that in wild horse conservation. I'd love to see that kind of thing come together for this cause. It's not, I don't think it's out of the question. Of course, egos and pride and all of that, but I don't know. I think in the end, it's our common cause that kind of trumps things. So I'm hopeful about that too.
Yeah, anyone who wants to email me, you can go to our website at chwha.org. Our email is info@chwha.org. Heather has put Chad's information in the chat a few times. So if you want to contact him, if you have information about his classes or even his next book coming out. This was totally fascinating, Chad. I am so happy to finally meet you virtually. I'm
Likewise.
going to look forward to and put it on my bucket list to meet you in person.
Yeah, hey, we're not that far apart.
We are not that far apart. So I really do hope that our paths can cross in person. And this was just phenomenal. Really, this was, people are saying over and over again how educational this was, learned so much, really enjoyed it. So really, again, thank you for being a part of this and for everything that you do for wild horses where you are. So, and thank you everyone for being here. We will have the videos of these put on our YouTube channels soon, so everyone can revisit this and go through the information. I know that I wrote down a ton of books that I want to read now in whatever free time I have. So thank you for that too, Chad. So
Bet.
everyone's saying thank you again. Very great presentation. So thank you and really, really great to meet you.
Likewise. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.